Hello, welcome to Her Journey Home. I'm your host, Sophia Noel Graniella. My mission here is simple: to hold space for honest stories and conversations that are usually left unsaid. This podcast is for the women in seasons of becoming, rebuilding their lives, reclaiming their voice, and remembering who they were before the world told them who to be. So come as you are, and let's begin the journey home together. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Her Journey Home. As you can see, I'm in a different house now. I've been house sitting all throughout California for the summertime and just looking at different spaces that I may possibly call home. I'm traveling here. I go to Austin next week. I'll already be there by the time that this episode is out. And I'm really just taking this time of my life to figure out where I want to put some roots down and where I want to build community. And if you've been following my journey for quite some time, I went back home to stay with my 93-year-old grandmother over the last couple of months. And I was just feeling called to change my environment. I'm from a really, really small town in upstate New York. And for me right now, in this phase of building my business and rebuilding my life in my 30s, being surrounded by other people that are also on a similar journey is a requirement. It's not something that I am willing to compromise on at this stage in my life. And I'm sure many of you can resonate with that. But today's episode, I wanted to do a fun episode around all the different versions of me and what led me here. So a little bit more of a get to know me episode, because as human beings, we oftentimes go through many pivots and many iterations of ourselves. And every single version and season of our life teaches us something so incredibly valuable that has now brought us to where we are today. So this episode is going to be really incredible, especially if you've been on a path and you are not necessarily where you want to be yet. I think many of us can resonate with that. I'm still not where I want to be yet, but I'm falling back in love with the journey and the process. And it's really important to be able to love every single version of you who came first, because without her, you wouldn't be here right now listening to this podcast. And I want to share more about the versions of me so that you can really get to know who Sophia really is, the woman behind Her Journey Home, and what even led me to launching my podcast and building the confidence to speak more vulnerably and share parts of my journey that I had never shared in the past. So I want to take it all the way back to my childhood. As I mentioned earlier, I'm 32 years old, but when I was a little girl, there was a version of me that was an entrepreneur straight out of the womb. I was always building businesses from the time I was about 4 to 5 years old. I would host lemonade stands with my cousin. And then I started to sell soaps to my neighbors. I would buy really amazing herbs and flowers, and I would create the soaps from scratch. And I would put them into all these different beautiful molds, and I would wrap them in wrapping paper and put pretty bows on them. And I would put them in a basket and go door to door selling them to my neighbors. That was probably my first actual business where I started making good money. And then I would go to the dollar store and I would buy little $1 trinkets and put them in a basket and sell them for $10 to my neighbors. I'm telling you guys, I was such a freaking hustler. And then when I was about 10 or 12 years old, I started building websites. And I used to have rabbits and guinea pigs growing up. And I would sell rabbit supplies on a website. And I just fell in love with teaching myself skills. I really loved building websites and doing more techie nerd type of things online. And I've always been an entrepreneur. So it makes perfect sense why I do what I do now. The next version of Sophia was the teenage version of Sophia, which she was a rebel. I learned that being me was not safe because I was bullied growing up. And from a young age, I started using substances and drinking. I was 14 years old when I took my first ecstasy pill. And from that point on, I realized, oh my gosh, when I do drugs and I go to festivals, I feel like I'm free. I feel liberated. I feel like I can just be myself. And so it was a really great way for me to escape and to also feel that sense of belonging with other people around me. And I basically made it my mission to be loved and accepted no matter what it took. And there was a point in my high school life and season that I was selling weed out of the back of my trunk. And people would leave school and leave their class and come to my old Infinity, and I'd pop open the trunk and I would sell them their bag. And it's really funny to think about that. When my mom heard one of my episodes where I said that, she was like, Sophia, I cannot believe that you sold weed out of the back of your car and you were doing all these things. And I had no idea. But I was still a pretty good student at that point in time. I did quit all the sports that I was playing because I was throwing myself into partying and not really doing anything to nourish my body. But I was still doing pretty well in school. So my parents didn't really have that much concern with my grades at that point. But I was definitely a rebel. And then college Sophia came, and I got into a very emotionally abusive relationship at that point. I had absolutely no sense of self worth. I continued throwing myself into partying and working and doing anything I could to prove myself to everyone else around me. And at that point, I got into the service industry. So I actually worked as a bottle girl at a nightclub. I was a bartender, I was a server, I was a hostess. And a little fun fact about me is that my aunt owned a restaurant in the town that I was born in. And so from the time I was 14 or 15, I was bussing tables. I was already building the communication skills I needed to work in the service industry. And I will honestly say that I think it should be a requirement for anyone that is building a business to have worked in the service industry before, because you get to know how people operate. You get to have conversations. You build your people skills, your relationship building skills. And I would not trade that part of my life for anything, because I don't think I would be where I am today without working in the service industry for 6, 7, 8 years. And then there was that season in college where I also started to solo travel. And solo travel, if you haven't listened to other ones of my podcasts or parts of my social media, you will know that I am an adventure girl through and through. Adventure and traveling the world has quite literally changed my life in more ways than I can even count. And doing things that really stretch me and pull me out of my comfort zone and being able to immerse myself in new cultures and see how other people live their lives has been the best education I could ever give myself. And when I was 21 years old, 20 or 21, I booked my first flight to Ghana in Africa. And I volunteered at a children's orphanage. And it was really the first trip that opened my eyes to the world. It completely shifted my perspective on what we consider to be problems here in the US versus what other people are dealing with in other countries that may not have running water, that may not have flushing toilets, that may not have homes that they can actually sleep in. And it was just this really big holy shit moment of I need to see more of the world. I want to give more of my time to this. I want to be able to help and contribute in whatever way that I can. And that trip really changed my life. And I fell head over heels in love with traveling and seeing the world. And I've now traveled to 26 countries. And travel in my 20s also became a really big way for me to escape and to numb and to not sit with my emotions. So when I finally got out of that relationship that I was in my 20s, that was very emotionally abusive and narcissistic, I was so low in my life. I had no sense of self worth. I didn't know who I was. I decided to book a one-way flight to China. And I taught English for almost 8 months while I was there in Nanjing, which is about 3 hours south of Beijing and about 2 hours north of Shanghai. And it was a really incredible experience. It really shifted the way that I looked at what I was capable of, because I realized if I can live in another country that is so far from the United States, and I can stand up in front of a class of 10 to 20 children and I can build that confidence to teach, like I can do anything. And at the same time, I was still heavily drinking, heavily partying, not taking care of myself. And so that trip ended up just being another way to escape and numb and run away from my emotions. And what I also realized on that trip is wherever you are, there you are. There's a really beautiful saying, and I can't remember who said it, but wherever you are, there you are, which basically means you cannot run away from your emotions. Whatever it is that you are dealing with inside, you can move to the other side of the world in Australia and they will follow you there. And so basically, for most of my 20s, I ran away from anything that I was feeling, and I only allowed myself to feel the good emotions, which I don't believe there's any bad emotions because our emotions are teachers. But I was so scared of feeling grief and sadness that I did anything I could to avoid sitting with myself. And basically, what happened is I continued getting into really toxic, abusive relationships throughout all of my 20s until I was 28 years old. And that enters the next season of my life. And when I was 28 years old, I met someone who I fell head over heels in love with. We were only dating for about 8 months, but it was one of those relationships where you just connected so deeply, mentally, physically, spiritually, just in every aspect of life. He was an entrepreneur. He was building businesses. He was younger than me, but he was very mature for his age. And I just remember being able to be weird and goofy and just be myself with him, which was really the first time I had ever felt that in my life. And I fell head over heels in love. But because I hadn't taken the time to really heal certain abandonment wounds, and because I was still very insecure deep down underneath everything, within about 6 months of being in the relationship, I started picking fights. I started tearing him apart. I started to have a lot of the old trust issues come up, even though he had done nothing to break my trust. And my drug use and alcohol was a really huge issue at that time. It was the darkest season of my life. I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was going out all the time. And I really was just in this chaotic spiral of not taking care of myself. And I was lying to him about my substance abuse. And at the time, he was actually pretty much sober. He would drink here and there, but he was very healthy. He was really focused on building his business. And it opened my eyes to, oh my goodness, I am going out all the time. I am using substances on a random Tuesday night at a bar. This isn't normal. But because of my environment and because of the friends I was surrounded by at that time, I didn't think anything of it. I just thought this is normal. Everyone does this, right? I'm in my 20s. I should be able to have fun. And I would make so many excuses for myself at that point because I wasn't willing to just look in the mirror and realize that I was the common denominator. And after 8 months, we broke up. Our relationship blew up. And I will never forget the time where I was standing in my living room and he was there and we were having a breakup conversation. And I was so heartbroken, crying my eyes out, hugging him, holding him. And he said the words to me, "This is over. We're not getting back together. This is really done this time." And I could feel it in his energy and his body language that he meant what he was saying. And I took my laptop, my MacBook Air, and I threw it across the room and it smashed into the wall into a million pieces. And I felt this sadness and this anger and this grief rush through my body at that time. And I remember looking at him and I said, "Everyone always leaves me." And it still gives me goosebumps to this day. Because what happened is about a year later, I looked back at that situation and I thought to myself, holy shit, nobody was ever leaving me or abandoning me. I have been abandoning myself for so many years, my voice, my desires, my truth. I didn't know who I was. And because I kept getting into relationship after relationship, I never took the time to process anything that had happened. I wasn't giving myself the time or the space or the love that I really needed to be able to love up on myself and become whole and complete on my own without anyone else needing to complete me. And so we ended up breaking up. I booked a one-way flight to Mexico, as I did at that time, because again, it was just a means for me to escape. I got on a flight and I went to Mexico to get away from everything. And for the first part of that trip, I was drinking, I was still using substances. But I remember a very specific moment where I got on a bus from Mexico City to San Miguel de Allende. And San Miguel de Allende is one of my favorite cities ever. It is a little European city in the middle of Mexico. It has cobblestone streets, beautiful, colorful houses. You can smell the food and the abuelas cooking tortillas, and it's amazing. And I remember being on that bus and my head was leaned up against the glass window and I was looking out at the rolling hills. And there was a really loud voice that said, "You should really start a podcast." Because another way that I was really allowing myself to process the grief and the trauma and the heartbreak was listening to podcasts all about heartbreak and healing and being single and loving being single. And it was at that time I heard the voice say, "Launch a podcast." But I was so disconnected from myself at that time that I was like, there is no way on planet Earth I'm going to be able to launch a podcast because I'm still in the thick of my healing journey. I am heartbroken. I don't know who I am. I need time. But I will never forget that moment because, of course, now I have a podcast. And it was not until about a month and a half into that trip, I ended up going to Tulum with my girlfriend. I spent my last $300 on cocaine. I was at my all-time low. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror and I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. And I thought, holy shit, I cannot continue living this way. And it makes me really emotional because When I look back at that version, she just needed love. She just needed someone to tell her that everything was going to be okay and that she had so much potential and so much light to spread through the world. And I am so grateful that I never gave up on her because that version of me didn't know any better. And she lived her entire life for everyone else. All she wanted was to be loved and accepted and to feel that sense of belonging. So I want you, if you're listening to this episode today, to honor every single version of you that came first. Because without her, you wouldn't be here where you are today. You wouldn't have the strength and the resilience to continue pushing through. And I am truly forever grateful for that version of me who just kept on believing, that kept on believing and trusting that things could eventually get better, even if I couldn't see it at that time. And after that situation, I went and I sat with ayahuasca. And now ayahuasca definitely is something that is glorified. And I think a lot of people go on ayahuasca journeys without truly understanding what that medicine really holds and the power of it and being respectful to the medicine. And I remember when I sat with ayahuasca, I was so terrified because I arrived with 21 strangers. I didn't know anybody there. And we sat in this circle. And I remember when it was my turn to share my intentions for the ceremony and to share why I was there to begin with, there was this moment in my body where I got so choked up and my throat started to close. And I was so scared of speaking my truth because in that moment, I thought I can either be honest that I have a substance abuse issue and that I need to stop partying and get my life together, or I can just share about my heartbreak and my family and the suicides in my family. And that is why I'm there. And at that time, because I hadn't built the confidence of speaking and sharing and being vulnerable, I opted for the latter. And instead of sharing my truth and my substance abuse, because I was embarrassed and ashamed, I shared that I was there because I wanted to heal generational trauma, which is all true. I wanted to heal from my heartbreak. I wanted to really reconnect with myself. I wanted to get more clarity on parts of my past. And all of that was true, but it wasn't the full truth. And I skirted around the truth because I was so scared of the judgment and the perception. And again, I was feeling ashamed. And I'll never forget that moment because now I think about it and I'm like, wow, if I could go back in time and just realize that it was all my own perception of myself. I was judging myself for that. I was judging myself for my substance abuse issues. But that ayahuasca ceremony showed me something that was so freaking profound. I remember laying down after taking my first cup of the medicine and I couldn't stop fidgeting. I was moving around. I was so uncomfortable. I'm like, is this ever going to be over? And I felt sick to my stomach. That is the one thing with ayahuasca. You will feel dizzy. You'll want to throw up, be nauseous. Oh my goodness. But I couldn't throw up. So it was just like the spins times 100 without actually being able to throw up. And I remember in my mind, the medicine kept telling me, Sophia, you need to stop drinking. You need to stop using drugs. You need to get sober and your life will change. And I kept fighting it. And I kept saying, no, I'm not willing to let this go because all my friendships are revolve around partying. I will lose my sense of identity. I won't know who I am. I will be so lost. And for the first hour, I fought it and fought it and fought it. And all of a sudden, something came over me. And I started getting full body chills. And I felt this sense of calm and relaxation, and my whole body melted into the floor beneath me. And something came into my body and I said, I surrender. I'm done. I said, I will stop using substances. I didn't say I would stop drinking right away because there was still this part of me that thought if I stop doing everything, I'm going to lose all my friends. I'm not going to know who I am. It's going to be so fucking scary. Oh my gosh. But I did say I will get my life together. I will start prioritizing my health and I will stop doing substances. And I just surrendered. And all of a sudden, the medicine took me down the most beautiful path you could ever imagine. I saw sunshine. I saw rainbows. I saw my face on billboards. It was crazy. I could have never imagined that. And all I saw was loving relationships, friends that supported me, my family just being in the best, oh my gosh, like loving community I've ever seen before. And I went down this path and I saw myself rebuilding my relationship with my father, which we've been so close now. And I woke up from that ayahuasca journey. I called my dad. I apologized to him about fights we had had in the past. And I made a commitment to myself. And I think that's one of the most important things with ayahuasca. Oftentimes, You get downloads, you get information, but now it is up to you to take all of that and apply it to your life and to make the changes that are necessary. And I started to go to Pilates. I started going to the gym. I stopped using substances. I continued to put myself into toxic environments for the first couple months after the ceremony. And every single time I would go out to a club or a bar, I would get home and I would cry myself to sleep. And my body was literally resisting it so much. And I realized I kept getting these little intuitive nudges of, Sophia, this is not meant for you anymore. You're growing outgrowing this life. You are not meant to be surrounded by these people doing the same things over and over. You have so much potential. But of course, I wanted to have one last little hurrah. So I went to a Miami music festival when I was there. And I didn't do any substances, but I was dancing, having fun, and I drank way too much that night. I probably had 10 tequila shots. And I was so out of my body. So I felt anger coming up, and I was just messy and chaotic. And I remember I ended up losing my keys, and one of my friends was there who's still friends to this day. She's incredible. And I remember something just came over me. I could feel my higher self looking down at me. And I can remember her saying, Sophia, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know that you have so much potential. You know that you are meant to serve and make an impact in this world. And if you continue drinking and partying and doing these things, you will never be able to tap into your true potential. And I remember in that moment feeling this and battling internally, just feeling so angry with myself that I had done it again. And I looked over at my friend and I said, this will be the last night that I drink alcohol. And I am now 2.5 years sober. I have not drank since that night. And when I say so much in my life has changed, it is a miracle. It is truly a freaking blessing. And moving into the next season of my life is when I launched Her Journey Home. I started to share my journey online. I launched a couple other businesses that I ended up shifting out of. I started to do face to camera videos, being more vulnerable, being more open about my sobriety journey. And something really beautiful happened. I realized I'm not alone in this. And I realized that by me being vulnerable and sharing more openly about my story, I was also able to connect so deeply with other people that were struggling or going through similar challenges. And I realized the power of being honest and sharing your story. And about 6 months, a little longer into my sobriety, I launched Her Journey Home, which is what you're listening to right now. And this podcast has become my greatest love and joy in my life. It has allowed me not only to share my story and connect with all of you, but it has allowed me to process and integrate parts of my journey. It has allowed me to really tap into my authentic self expression. It's allowed me to bring parts of myself that I had hidden from the world for so many years online. I was always told, you're too much, you're too loud, you're too annoying. And I took all of that on as truth. And podcasting gave my voice a space to exist. It gave me a platform to bring the parts of myself that I had hidden online for so many years to take up space, to learn that being me is beautiful, to learn that these parts of myself that I had hidden are actually my gifts and my superpowers. And they're now the parts of myself that I love the most. So this is your reminder, if you're listening to this episode, that oftentimes the parts of yourself that you've been hiding, once you embrace them and once you learn to love them, they will become your greatest gifts and assets, because life is a mirror. And when you start to love up on yourself, so will the world around you. So will your friends. So will your relationships. Because in the past, when I took on as truth that I was too much, I was annoying, I was too intense, every relationship that I was in would tell me, you're annoying, shut the fuck up, be quiet. But when I started to love my too muchness and I started to love my intensity and my passion, because it allows me to speak my truth, it allows me to podcast and have these beautiful conversations with you, I realized, wait a minute, I love these parts of myself. So I want you to recognize that once you start to embrace these parts of you, my goodness, it will open up an entire world of opportunity for you. And I can't wait to see what you create. And the current season of life that I'm in right now, I'm 32 years old. I've been rebuilding for the last few years. It has been very challenging. Last summer, I almost filed for bankruptcy. But what I learned in that moment is that I was focusing way too much on what I didn't have in my life and the debt. And now I've been focusing on creating more connection, building community, serving my clients in my unfiltered program, which is my self expression and podcast program. And everything in my life has changed. I decided I didn't want to file for bankruptcy. I've been paying off my debt and building more of a community at the same time and focusing on the abundance that's already in my life, the love that surrounds me, my friends, my family, the roof over my head. And I realized that the more I focused on all the good and the blessings and the miracles, the more that would come into my life. And I want this to be your reminder that if you're currently going through challenges, hardships, struggles in your life, it's okay. It's all part of the human experience. And you can feel the grief. You can feel the sadness. You can allow yourself to feel your emotions. Please do. It's so important to. But then I want you to shift into what can I focus on moving forward that can bring me more joy, more excitement, more pleasure, and pour your heart and your soul into the things that make you feel alive. And when I poured myself into my podcast, I realized I didn't need to file for bankruptcy. I didn't need to go down this dark, dungeony path because I actually have so much that I can lean into and I can process these parts of my journey on my podcast. And then I launched Unfiltered, which is my absolute pride and joy, my favorite program I have ever created. My clients are so near and dear to my heart. They are such brilliant, soul led, incredible women. And I started to facilitate egg freezing retreats in Mexico City. I've gone on lots of different side quests. I got my Pilates certification and I realized I didn't want to teach Pilates. And my biggest joy in this entire life is helping women turn their stories into podcasts and to build conviction in their voice, and to build confidence in their values, their perspectives, and their authentic self expression. And this season of life has really been about surrender, trusting that I am where I am meant to be. As cliche as it is, I believe that. I trust that what is meant for me will never miss me. And that if I continue building momentum and showing up every single week behind the mic and doing the things that light my soul on fire and nourishing my body, I'm a big strength training girl. I love working out so much. It's part of my lifestyle that eventually I will look back and I will be so grateful that I continued building my business and that I never gave up. And anytime that I ever have moments of self doubt, comparison, when I want to give up, I look back at that version of me 3 to 4 years ago that spent her last $300 on drugs. And immediately I continue pushing through. I continue showing up. I continue sharing my story. So if you are currently rebuilding in your 30s or even in your 20s or your 40s, if there are moments where you start to doubt yourself or you're scrolling on social media and you're comparing your life to everyone's highlight reels, stop for a moment, put your hands on your heart and think about that version of you 3 to 4 years ago that didn't even think it was possible to change her life. And just sit with her for a moment and thank her and give her so much love and just recognize that you are doing it for her. And you're also doing it for that 4-year-old version of you that had big dreams, that never thought that anything was too big for her. That was an entrepreneur, that was creative, that just allowed her creativity to fly. And you're also doing it for that 90-year-old version of you, where at the end of your life, you can look back on your life and be so fucking proud of what you've accomplished, so proud of how you've led yourself through the world, so proud of the impact that you've made, of the people that you've changed. That is who you are doing it for. Drop the comparison, drop the proving yourself to everyone else and their mothers. Prove yourself to you because you are worth it. I love you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I wanted to shed light on more about my journey, but also how important this evolution is and how important it is to honor every single version of you that came first, because without her, you would not be here today. My goodness. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Thank you for sitting with me, for taking the time to listen every single week. This is my biggest pride and joy. And I am so beyond grateful for each and every one of you for this community. And if you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and like and rate and subscribe. Share it with someone that needs to hear this message today. And as always, I will see you for another episode next Thursday.